Hey, welcome back. I have one of my favorite types of videos for you here today. We have a video on the Brown knives history and an overview of everything he's done. I am going to leave this here on the screen for just a second for you to screenshot if you'd like, or pause and read over. I will also be including this in the description, and as you may have seen with some of my other videos like this with Oz and with Demco and Victorinox, sometimes I end up learning more after the video, and I'll include some of those details as well. So if there's, instead of 17 bullets, if you see 18 bullets, don't be surprised, because I sometimes learn more info. Brown Knives, really interesting company to me. I live in Bellingham, Washington, north of Seattle. North of me, even further, is Blaine, Washington, which is the last city before you get to Vancouver, Canada. Surrey, Canada, technically, and White Rock technically is the first city there. But before you get up into Canada, you go through Blaine, Washington, and Blaine, Washington's known for having some manufacturing. There is a large BP refinery up there, I believe it is, or location. And Blaine is the last city here on the coast in Washington before you get to Canada. So up there also is Craig Brown, who's a one-man shop, and he does these limited runs of beautiful knives. They're either custom or semi-custom, and or even in some cases just what he'd call like a high-quality USA-made CNC. And he does these limited runs of 300 to 400 knives per model. Or in the case of his very first model, the Parabolic, which was an integral, he only did 35 of these. But he got started, I was actually surprised. I thought when I looked at his profile that it appears he either had a second career or he's much younger than I realized. He graduated from Western Washington University in 2012 with a Bachelor of Science in Manufacturing Engineering. Around that year, he had started his first internship at Paccar, which does truck design and manufacturing. Really well-known company here in Washington as a top employer. And then he moved over to Zodiac Aerospace, which you've probably never heard of, but is well known here in Bellingham, Washington, as one of our large employers and known as being a really strong aerospace engineering firm. He started there in a engineering role, and then worked his way into a supervisor role over like what would that be, like a 5-year period? While he started Brown Knives, and then I think he had an overlap of maybe a year, and I watched a great interview here from Knife Joy where he talked about, he's no longer getting enough sleep at night, and then it was time to just start full-time on Brown Knives. And that was, it looked like it was probably around the end of 2017 that he made the full cut over to full-time at Brown Knives. So a couple other salient points here. When he first started, he did these CAD designs, and he built his own small benchtop CNC converted from an old Grizzly mill, is what he had described. And he built this parabolic, in that format, CAD design first, and then on this it took him months, I guess, to convert this this mill into a CNC for like a desktop CNC or benchtop CNC. That first model, he said a lot of hard lessons learned. 2 of them, one of them was that it's very hard to do an integral. So that was his first model, and he did an integral here. You can see it's one piece of titanium that's been carved out. And second was he didn't want to do satin blade. This particular one is Parabolic number 12. And I saw in the post that he decided he did not like the idea of ever doing a hand-rubbed satin blade again. I don't know if he ever did it, but that was a funny comment in his Instagram. Very hard to make an integral, let alone in the US. So those were very expensive, around $1,000, give or take. And there were some that were very fancy, damascus and so on. You can see here, I wrote down, he had these inlays into the titanium. I saw anything from CPM 20CV, CPM 154, which are blade steels that you'll actually see manifest themselves in a lot of his other models as his go-to types of blade steel. He did ladder damascus and a bunch of others, so kind of interesting as his first go at making knives. Then his second model, he announced let's see, Brown Parabolic. So I think what happened here, I either messed up the dates, or maybe he announced this What did I do? I messed something up on the date, so I'd have to take a second look and fix these dates. I'll update those when the servo was announced. Either that's because his Instagram started later, or it's because I think that's what happened, is his Instagram started later. So, but I'll have to go double check my dates on that. But the servo was then announced. It is a flipper knife only, so really nice action on this one. If you do put pressure on the lock bar, it does create some issues during deployment, so it is sensitive to lock bar pressure, but if your hand's off of it, amazing action here. For this being his second knife, to get that type of insane action is really remarkable, and you saw it manifest itself throughout a ton of other knives. He made these, let's see, in quite a few different blade steels. I think this one, if I recall correctly, this one is, let me just take a second look real quick. Servo number, I always forget the number of this one. I know all the others. 168, and this one is M390 as I thought, and he has some damascus parts on this, which is pretty cool. But this was like one of his very few M390 knives. He did do a lot in 20 CV over the years, but not a lot in M390. But that's the servo. This was his second knife. Then he came out with the Exponent. He announced the Exponent, where are we here, in February of 2019. So he had quite a long time under the servo. You can see that was like a few years that he was making the servos. I'd have to check the archive to see the number. I think one of the things I'll update on here is I'll go into the archives and see if I can say how many of each model was made. I didn't include that here, so I'll try and include it. But he then came out with the Exponent. It's so different because the first two are quite big knives. Those are like probably 8 to 9 inch knives. This is a front flipper only. And my thumb is unfortunately kind of hurting right now, so bear with me as I try and do some deployments here. But it is a remarkable high polished blade on this particular one. And it's a very small knife. This is probably like a 7 inch, maybe a 7.5 inch knife if I had to guess. At the very most, probably 7.5 looking at it. But a much smaller knife here. And yeah, really interesting to see how he started to change up what he was doing, which then manifested itself. And that one right there is Exponent number 6, sorry. So this is the 6th one that he ever made. Damascus here, quite beautiful. The milling, by the way, on this servo, I need to make sure and point out, because it is pretty darn remarkable and worth showing what that milling looks like. It is pretty darn cool. What he did here. You can see, I don't have the best light going on here, but let me see if I can illuminate it a little more. There you go. Now you can see what I'm referring to, which is the milling on this thing is pretty fantastic, pretty cool. The Damascus though on this Exponent, Exponent is also really nice, and just showed what he was able to do so early on in his first few years. These knives were, I mean, even if you just see the crazy like ladder Damascus and stuff he was doing on these initial parabolics, they're amazing. So then you can see him evolve here. You get into the LHC here. This is LHC prototype number 3. And you're getting into a much more, what I'd say, like marketable or common market type knife. This would appeal to a much broader set of people than either of those first 3. I think all 3 of those first 3 are pretty polarizing. He's just starting to make this spear point kind of style and move away a little bit from that leaf style. It's still certainly there, but you can see there's some evolution here in the blade shape. This fuller is kind of funny. You really can't even get to it because this lock bar is here. It's a total, I think he ended up really doing away with the fuller on most of these, because unless you're lefty, I don't think you could really deploy this at all. The only way that you could use this fuller would be left-handed, really, because you can get to it from that side of the knife, but not from this side of the knife. So it's kind of funny. And I haven't found a way to like thumb flick it out of there. So it's interesting. Then you see a much more evolved version in the LHCX V2 here. Get my hand out of the way while I do that. Beautiful damas steel blade, like true damas steel, not just a one-off Damascus. Amazing back spacer design. Like this really started to come together. The action, impeccable, world class action. Just hydraulic drop shut. And you can see how he's doing inlays. He's got a bolster lock here, whereas the first set were all, I guess these two were frame lock. This was actually a liner lock, but a very hard to get to one and pretty hard to actuate, really uncomfortable, candidly. He did do quite a bit of models, including the Cortex, where he had a mix of an option to do like a frame lock or a liner lock. We'll get to that in a minute though. But these bolster locks on the LHCX, this is actually the first Brown knife that I got. This is not the one. I had a different one that a friend of mine has now. But man, check out, by the way, Durning Knives on Instagram. He has an amazing collection. But man, this sort of style was what I got first, and it really showed me what the fit and finish was. And yeah, I was pretty blown away and very excited that there was such an amazing knife maker right here close to where I lived. So we've let's hit this from a date perspective. The LHC was announced in September of 2019, so a much shorter time period, going from years to months. You know, really a 6-month period that looks like there, and then you had your 7-month period, and then you had a new model announced. Then he got to the Cortex, and I have these sort of in the center here. These are the intros and kind of the evolution. This is where I think he got very pivotal. This is Brown Knives Cortex number one. So this was his first prototype, actually. So it's prototype number 1, rather. Just got this one. It's my most recent Brown Knives acquisition. It's brilliant, CPM 154. Beautiful action, beautiful bolster lock design. Really just fantastic. You can, this particular one's a little hard to thumb flick compared to the other ones, but you can thumb flick this guy. You can front flip it. You can flipper tab it, and you can spidey flick it. It is extremely well-rounded in how you can deploy it, and the blade is much more EDC oriented. One of the things I did notice on this prototype was the jimping and the sort of how pointy and tall that is changed as he went into the later models. So if you look up the Cortex archive, and there's a Brown Knives archive where he covers everything from the servo and on. He didn't have the parabolics in there. It may even be a subset of the servo. You'll see the differences. And here you can see this is number 182. Wait, sorry. This is number 313. This is number 182. I have these out of order. This is number 182 of the Cortex. And it's V2 because the it has the I'm gonna of course slip my mind on this. I try and do too many things on these videos. The bolster and the pivot collar around here. There's a little collar around there, which is definitely a nicer looking look to it. But you can also see this flipper tab is much less pointy, and it kind of points back more, which is interesting. This particular one is a wild version. This, by the way, was my Carta bolster lock. This is a frame lock titanium. It looked like some sort of anode titanium here and here and here. Maybe it's DLC, I don't know. Damasteel, crazy Damasteel show side and Damasteel blade. That just is a mind-bending experience to look at this particular knife. It's pretty wild how it's done. So that's Damasteel. You can even see on the inside it's Damasteel. Pretty sick. So now you're getting a very diverse knife that has multiple deployment methods, and it's really, I think, part of this evolution from a very simple deployment knife and whatnot to a very advanced one. Also, his Brown lock started to come into, I think, the servo. It could even be here. I don't know. I'd have to go look at whether these had it, but he has something kind of similar to the Holt where you have like the inner channel that runs on the blade, which is cool. Cortex, Damasteel, CPM 154 for the most part. I don't think he did a lot of those in like a 20 CV, but I'm not 100% sure. This is the one I definitely love the most, along with the, I gotta love the, number 1 prototype. But man, this is a beautiful damascus bolster lock version, and the action on this one is just insanely smooth. Like, these bolster lock versions are, you can just be so gentle and get amazing action from them. This one, I fail it far less often than my other Cortex variants. It has a really cool like stone washed or dark washed blade on it. And yeah, the milling detail, the damascus, the back spacer anode, the damascus pocket clip, and whatever it is, either ano or DLC coated hardware here, comes together as just a remarkably beautiful knife with a beautiful action to it. So that brings us to the latest models. These were all released here in the last year or so. And they're really, I think, what kind of take this company to the next level. They were certainly popular with a lot of these other models, but man, I think the market demand, is really getting met. One of the things he talks about in this Knife Joy interview is really listening to the customer and trying to appeal to what they're looking for. And I think he's really found something special in this next model, which is the FSD. And the FSD was first announced in March of 2022. His whole thing on this, if you go watch the video on Instagram, it's really cool. It's actually his last video on Instagram. He hasn't done an update since the announcement of the FSD on Instagram. But it was big because there was like 3 things he changed. One was he was trying to look for something that was more scalable. I think he's looking for efficiencies. 2, you only had 2 blade steel types. He did do some semi-customs where you could anodize the scales or the hardware and stuff like that. But he basically said, I'm only do 3 milling patterns on the handles, whereas some of these have just crazy. I mean, there's, I don't know, 100 plus in some of these cases. There's certainly some consistency, like he did a number of these Cortex with just the micarta. But man, there's, I don't know, he must have done 100 different versions of the LHC and all these different ones. They're really custom knives, whereas these are getting into what I'd call semi-custom or mid-tech, where he's using a lot of CNC and repeatable processes, which for a one-man shop must certainly help him scale and maintain his sanity. So quite different in how he brought these to market. And so let's talk about the FSD. This one is milling pattern number 3 for the FSD. A really cool one, kind of almost a Spanish look to it. This particular one is in 20 CV, which is marked here. You can actually see the model number and the 20 CV moniker there. He has a button lock, but if you look inside, it's actually more of a liner lock implemented into that brown lock, where there's basically an inset. You can see a little bit of it here, but you can't get the full sense of what's going on in there. But this, liner basically pops into the blade and locks it on both sides. It's very cool, very solid, and very fidgety. You have a lot of deployment options here. You have a really nice Spidey flick fuller, a really nice thumb deployment. Again, my thumb's kind of messed up right now, so I'm being a little gentle there. A really nice front flipper. I do not want to drop this on the other knives here, but we'll do our best. And you can just button flip it out. So if you just want to button flip it, you can do that as well. Here is pattern number 1. Sorry, these are out of order. Pattern number 1 was his first prototype. This isn't it. This is, and sorry, that was number 249, I believe. This one is number 54, so there's some differences. The button doesn't have the indentations that you saw here. The jimping is a little different on the back. The backs are on the both on the flipper tab and on the front. The jimping changed up a little bit. Maybe these don't represent it. I could be off on that. But anyway, the ability to do a flip in all these different directions, and just being such a unique knife, this really cool pocket clip. He has the made in Blaine, Washington, USA, milled inside under the pocket clip there. Just a really cool model that had very broad market appeal. It's a big knife, by the way. If you can't tell, it's a good 9.5 inch knife there. It's probably 9 inch. I meant 8.5 or 9, not 9.5. So yeah, an 8 3/4 inch knife. So that's a really big knife. Amazing, beautiful hollow ground there that he does. Does all of these in the same sort of satin hollow ground style. This particular one is CPM 154. This next one is number 182. By the way, this one was also number 182, I believe. So that's kind of cool. This one is milling style number 2. So we had number 3, number 1, and number 2. This one is a Blurple Ano. This is also, as I mentioned, number 182, CPM 154. Just a beautiful crazy example of what's possible when you do amazing CNC milling, and then you put something like a crazy Blurpo Anno on it. It really is quite spectacular, and again, kind of mind melding there. Same thing even just on the regular plain tie. This design is just a beautiful, beautiful design. Unfortunately, I just sold my, because I won for the first time, I actually won a knife at table price, which is awesome. So I just sold milling style number 2 for the mini FSD, which has kind of that same concept of getting smaller, but does it horizontally, which is cool. So mini FSD came out. I couldn't get the exact date. I sent him a message to see if I can get an answer on this, and I'll put it in the video description if so. But mini FSD came out, I think it was like September of 2022. He knocked out 300 or 400 of the FSDs and then went to the mini. I really saw a lot of posts about it in like October of 2022, so I'm assuming it must have come out around September of 2022. And this was an attempt to take still a full-size feeling knife, to be honest. Like this thing is it's not much smaller really. It definitely is, but it's more just the first one's kind of big. But yeah, just 7.75, about 7.875. So getting into that sort of EDC size. I think this is about 4.5 ounces. It's just a smaller version of the same thing. But it ends up being just an even more, I think, universally appealing knife, and that much better. This one right here is prototype number 1. So mini FSD prototype number 1. So this is the first one he knocked out. And what I have to say about this is, unlike the FSD, unlike a lot of the other models, the prototype appears to be, and I could be off on this, but it appears to be 1-to-1 with the rest of the models that I've seen brought out. I think because he had kind of perfected a lot of things on this model, you pretty much saw him go straight into this model without a lot of changes that needed to be made. Kind of already knew what he was doing, just took that model and shrunk it down and did it a service. I think in some ways I like the feel in hand on the full size because you just get a lot of purchase to be fidgety and stuff, and it just sits in my palm really well and stuff. But I think for anyone with smaller hands or that's going to EDC the knife is really going to appreciate this one as a better all-around knife to EDC and just use on a daily basis. So really, I think the culmination of the CNC expertise and just the amazing capability that he has as a knife maker manifest themselves in that model. So drops are done by email notifications. You can go to his website, and then it's whoever checks out fastest at the time of the drop. He does a bit of pre-made drops where you just have to buy one that you want as fast as possible, or he does semi-customs where you sign up and you pay a $10 deposit to build a semi-custom, and then you pay him before he ships the knife, and then he'll ship it out to you. He'll do annos, anno the different milling, that kind of stuff. So the semi-customs, are semi-custom. It's not like this where you can have a one-off knife. There's never been another one like this. That's not really the case so much for these. They're smaller variations, I guess I would say. And then there's one more point here, which is kind of fun, which is the mystery of the brown edge. Because there are a lot of people that have noted that a lot of these knives have not come with consistent edges. Sometimes he just ships knives and they're not super duper sharp. They'd probably cut most things, but if you go try and like cut into paper, they're not that level of sharp. And I don't know if he does that intentionally to leave metal behind for other people to decide what kind of edge they want to put on or what, but I'll call it the mystery of the brown edge. It's kind of fun. So I put here his website, his Instagram, some of his first posts on Instagram. First numbered knife was about a week later. He first numbered, like it looked like his second parabolic was numbered. I could be off on that, but parabolic number 0 appeared to be the second one, but I may have been off on that. And then, the great interview here from Knife Joy, just to give you a sense of who he is, if you're interested. So we're about 25 minutes in. I think, for me as a local brown knives enthusiast, there's a little extra element of why I love what he does. But there are a lot of people that collect and love his knives. I've connected with a lot of other collectors, was just chatting with one before I started this video. I got a good buddy that has a very similar collection where he got every model and stuff just like I did. And yeah, it's an easy manufacturer to kind of become enamored with and appreciate what he's done, because the level of quality that he puts into his work is really top notch, and it shows he cares. He cares about his customers, very responsive on the repairs that I've had to do with him. I bought a lot of these on the secondary, and people don't always know how to service their knives and keep them good. So I think I've probably sent 2 or 3 knives in that had either, like a D10 issue or something along those lines, and he sent them back super quickly within a week, and it's just been a fantastic experience getting to work with him. So excited I finally won his most recent semi-custom drop, and I have him making a mini FSD for me in milling pattern number 2. Now, milling pattern number 3 on the mini FSD is his first just sort of flat nude tie, so there's no milling on it. It's actually something I'd love to get my hands on if there's an opportunity, but I still gravitate towards the milling. I think it's just a huge part of what makes his brand exceptional, how the milling runs onto the pocket clips. There's not a lot of manufacturers that have done stuff like that. Very, very difficult, and really exemplifies what he's all about. But so I've got milling style number 2 coming. That'll be my first one getting to actually buy from him, and he's been super cool to work with through that process. Very busy guy, and you have to kind of respect it and not bother him too much, candidly. This is not a guy that wants to sit around chatting with you about your thoughts on knives, but I can respect that and totally respect people's privacy, especially as someone that's known by a lot of consumers. That's not always an easy thing to balance. So yeah, really neat set of knives. I'm sure I'm going to forget things. I'm going to go back and watch this video and feel like, oh man, I totally could have done more on this or that. And I'll usually do a second video that's kind of a follow-on once I've either found some other cool knives or found some other facts I felt like I left out, or just need to get the knives out and pop them open and have a little bit of fun. So hope you enjoyed this one. I hope it was helpful, and I'll be doing a little bit of an update on this. I'll try to remember, I'll usually catch this when I go back and watch the video, that I want to add in the number of each variant that was made, but usually I think it was between 35 and about 400 total variants that were made for any given model. I'm really curious to see if he ever stops making this one, because it's just such a good model. This mini FSD feels like something that he could, I don't want to just say stop right there, but keep that one around as like a ongoing model while he brings out other models. But Craig's, very clearly going to do what he likes to do, which I think is innovate and keep going forward. So, if he decides to retire that one, I got a feeling this is going to be one of those models that becomes extremely coveted once you can no longer actually win them on a drop and you have to get them secondary market. That's going to be a crazy, crazy model that's got a ton of history to it and demand, I feel like. Could be off, but there's one other flaw in that knife, which is that, especially on the mini one where there's a little less handle space, righties have a possibility of grabbing the button and having it fold. It's actually a little less problematic for lefties on this, because you more naturally aren't going to touch the button as a lefty. But righties have a little bit of a problem of the hand, depending on the size of your hand and how you grab it and stuff, potentially deploying the lock, because it does stick up out of the frame. So it's actually an issue on this one as well, but not as big of an issue because the knife handle is so big. You're pretty naturally going to avoid it because you have so much room to grab. But anyways, it's an issue on this one as well. Not sure that that's the best way to end the video. So, my last thoughts are that, it's pretty neat that you can see a manufacturer develop over like a 6+ year period from something that's, I'd call it kind of cool, but kind of clunky. And, this is like a 7-ounce knife that would not be a universal appeal, but certainly a collector could appreciate. Just something that any knife enthusiast would feel like, maybe not every knife enthusiast wants to spend $800 because that's the price range on this. And maybe I'll go through prices a little bit here, but, would appreciate as a knife. So price-wise, these are around $1,000. I don't know what the prices were like on these guys. I think I saw them ranging from $600-700 to, upward of $1,000 if you had all the fancy bits and fancy whatnot. I think you can get up to about $2,500 or so on most of these models. The most expensive one I remember seeing on his website was a damascus steel version like that, that I believe was around $3,000. I think was sort of the top end. On the table here, the most expensive ones from a table price perspective were this one and that one. I think were maybe $1,850 and $1,750, if I recall correctly. I think this one was up around $1,250 or so. I'm sure that one wasn't cheap, but I don't know. And most of the others are going to be something like that would be around $950 to do the ano on top of a 20 CV blade or something like that. This one's CPM 154. Oh yeah. So that one's probably more like 900 or something with some ano on a CPM 154. But you know, ano plus 20 CV now is about as much as you can spend on his current knives. You're still under $1,000, so food for thought. All right, I think that's about all for now. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. This is certainly a brand I'm very passionate about and could talk about for a long time. And I do talk about this brand with a lot of my friends quite a bit because it is something that's intriguing and unique. So hope this was a helpful resource. Please like, subscribe, and please do comment and let me know what I left out, either just if you want to share information with the other rest of the community about brown knives, or something I may have not covered that you'd be interested in knowing. I'll do my best to try and get you that information as well. All right, please like, subscribe, like I mentioned, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.